Lies is a true crime book written in 2003 by Ann Rule, focusing on the murder of Chris Northen, an airline pilot and confirmed bachelor turned devoted family man. In Heartful of Lies, Ann Rule used her compassion to show her concern for all victims of violent crime. At the time of her death, Ann was engaged in a legal battle. She was suing Rick Swart, a freelance journalist, for defamation. Rick had been engaged to the convicted murderer, Lisa Northen, and wrote a book of his own claiming that Ann had lied during her writing of Heartful of Lies. Not so shockingly, Rick did not divulge to his editors or readers that he was engaged to Lisa at the time of his book writing. Ann Rule was an amazing true crime writer and a former Seattle policewoman who deeply cared for the victims and the families she wrote about. Unfortunately, Ann Rule passed in July of 2015. I'm Teresa, and welcome to Canvas and Crime Chronicles. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be alerted every time I upload a new video. Thanks for listening. Chris Northen, a handsome and athletic airline pilot, confirmed bachelor turned devoted family man, and Lisa, an acclaimed surfing photographer, loving mother, and aspiring Hollywood screenwriter, got married in an idyllic Hawaiian wedding. No one, including Chris, had seen Lisa's dark side, her controlling behavior and bad moods, her unending hunger for money and property, and no one anticipated the fatal outcome of a family camping trip in Oregon forest. After the murder, Lisa soon revealed herself as a victim of domestic abuse that culminated at the campsite where she shot Chris in self-defense, so she claimed. Crime scene evidence led detectives to wonder if Lisa was an actual killer, not a victim. Her controversial trial stunned everyone who knew her. A lifetime of sociopathic manipulations, lies, and episodes of rage had all been hidden behind her facade of perfection. She let nothing become an obstacle to her ultimate happiness, even if it was the man she vowed to love forever. On October 8, 2000, in Wallowa County, Oregon, it was an odd weekend for camping. The weather was cool and would soon be turning cold, especially in places like the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest. But that didn't stop 44-year-old Chris Northen and his 38-year-old wife, Lisa Northen, from taking their 3-year-old son into the mountains for a weekend of adventure. Tragically, though, 3 people headed into the mountains, and only 2 would come out alive. In the early dark of Saturday, October 9th, Chris Northen would be shot in the head by the woman he married just 4 years before. The conflicting stories and descriptions of Chris and Lisa's relationship would soon begin. Lisa's friends and family insisted Chris abused Lisa, and those that knew Chris claimed that was all untrue and that Chris was a wonderful guy. There were so many extremely conflicting opinions, it was as if no one knew the actual truth or the real people behind Chris and Lisa. Unfortunately, Chris would be the one to end up murdered. Chris Northen was born in Oakland on September 12, 1956, and had 2 sisters. In 1968, the family moved to Bend, Oregon. They led a simple, normal, traditional life on a ranch. Chris did many chores on the farm and loved to play piano. Chris graduated from high school in 1974 and then moved to California. He loved outside water sports, and California was the perfect place for him. In 1980, Chris began to pursue his career as a pilot and soon became a pilot and flight instructor. Many of Chris's friends say he was extremely independent, occasionally dated but no one very seriously, and was the kind of guy that remained friends with his exes. He met Lisa in Oahu in Hawaii while sharing a home with other pilots. Lisa and her son lived across the street and they began seeing one another. Chris would become Lisa's 3rd husband. Lisa was born on March 10, 1962 in New Mexico. Her family moved to Washington State. She had 1 brother. She too enjoyed the outdoors and water sports, and she loved living in Hawaii. Lisa and Chris met in the mid-1990s. She was a successful photographer and he was a successful pilot. The relationship grew fast and furious, and Lisa constantly urged this lifelong bachelor to get married. They eventually did get married, and they divided their time between Oregon and Hawaii. They had 1 son together that they were raising with Lisa's son from a previous relationship. Within months of being married, Lisa changed and became negative and began to degrade and belittle Chris in front of friends. Lisa started to tell her friends and family she was being abused by Chris, a violent drunk and pot user. She claimed Chris had abused her 2 to 3 times each week, with her boys never witnessing the violence. She also claimed she called the police several times, but to no avail. Actuality, none of this can even be corroborated. One time Chris was arrested and charged with assault. However, Lisa never showed up for court, and therefore the charges were dropped. In 2000, as their marriage was on the rocks, Lisa suggested to go on a camping trip with their 3-year-old son Dane in an attempt to speak to Chris about him going to rehab. In the fall, campgrounds were mostly empty and not very populated. On October 9th, Lisa arrived at a friend's house, soaked and wet, to get her 8-year-old son. She told her friend Chris came at her with a knife, tried to choke her and hit her. She said she ran away, and while fleeing, she turned and fired a shotgun. She said she was too scared to go back and see what happened to Chris, and she just fled the scene. Her friend convinced her to go to the ER, and it was noted she had a black eye and scrapes and bruises. Sheriff Rich Stein was sent to the campground and found the campsite with a completely zipped blue sleeping bag on the ground. Chris's body was inside the sleeping bag, and the campsite was in disarray. Chris had already been dead for many hours. Chris's forehead and body were covered in sand, and he was naked. He was covered with bruises and scratches, and he had drag marks on his body. Two memorials were eventually held for Chris, one in Oregon and one in Hawaii, so that his many friends could honor him. Lisa was arrested for murder within days, and her trial started in July 2001. Stephen Briggs would be the prosecutor for the state. The trial only lasted a few short days. The two sides of the story were polar opposite. Lisa's friends believing Lisa was an abused spouse, although they never actually saw any evidence, and Chris's family saying what a nice guy he was. Not even an ex-girlfriend could be found to substantiate all the abuse allegations made by Lisa. The medical examiner found a very large amount of Restoril in Chris's system. This was enough to have put him into a coma or possibly kill him, and again, no alcohol was found in Chris's system, although Lisa claimed he was violently drunk at the camping trip. During the trial, Lisa claimed her mom was abusive too, but there was no evidence ever found of that. During her time in college, she had a fiancé, Ray. Ray was killed in a car accident. Unfortunately, this story cannot be corroborated either. Lisa was a writer as a hobby and had written about a recurring plot of an abused wife shooting and killing her husband. Did she carry out one of her stories? Lisa loved to write and had a very great imagination and had an amazing tendency to twist the truth, even faking amnesia once in order to get out of a previous relationship. She had journaled her entire months-long plan in a journal that was eventually found by the ex's family members. There went that. Lisa had given an older laptop to a friend, but then claimed it was stolen. While she was waiting for her trial to begin, she called her friend and asked her to destroy the laptop. Instead, the friend turned it over to the police. A search of the computer found that Lisa had researched forensics, poisons, and a gun silencer. Evidence began to pile up, and Lisa eventually took an Alford plea of manslaughter for a prison term of 12 years. Her attorneys thought there was no way she would be able to prove she was not guilty and an abused spouse. Lisa's sons would both be raised by her second ex-husband while she was in jail. Lisa tried to sue her attorney for malpractice, but that went nowhere. 50 years old and 12 years after killing her husband in a northeastern Oregon campground, Lisa Northen left the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville in 2012. Thank you for listening to another episode of Canvas and Crime. If there was a story you would like to look into and recap, drop it in the comments. I avoid over-sensationalized serial killers and the over-popular stories. But feel free to offer suggestions, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be alerted every time I upload a new video. Thank you!